Hi, everybody, and welcome to Organizing Life's Daily Demands. I'm Peter Gordon. I'm a daily money manager. My company is New York Financial Organizers, and we help people with the non-investment side of finances and help them organize their finances. And the purpose of this podcast is to introduce our listeners to people who help in other ways of organizing people's lives. And today I have the pleasure of being with Allison Jaffe. And good morning, Allison. How are you?
Good morning, Peter. Fine, thank you.
That's great. So Allison and I know each other from this great program, it's a great organization. We talk about this a lot in my podcast called the Orion Resource Group. And Allison is in the real estate business. And why don't you tell us about your services?
Well, the reason that I'm in Orion along with you is because I'm a seniors real estate specialist as a real estate broker. And the difference between a seniors real estate specialist and your average generalist, if you will, as a real estate broker is that we approach transactions as more transitional than transactional. And I say that because when someone sells a house or an apartment after a long time of living there, it's usually due to some sort of life change,
Right.
Positive or negative, whether it's an illness, a family loss, or move into the what has been a long time vacation home, or moving to where the grandchildren are. Any number of reasons, but it's a life change more than a change of address.
It's moving is always an upheaval, but in these situations, it's gigantic.
Yeah, we are always surprised by what we accumulate, both emotionally and physically over the course of, say, 10 or 15 years of living someplace.
Or longer.
But when you've lived someplace for decades,
Right.
35, 45, I've had clients who have been in their homes for 50 years.
Wow.
It's a lot to change all of that. And especially at a time, if that change, if that move is being motivated by something unfortunate, whether it's an illness or an injury or the loss of a spouse or something like that, you're going through so much change to also have to change your residence, your nest at
Right.
that point in your life, or even shortly thereafter. That's a lot. That's asking a lot.
Absolutely.
And it kind of filters, if you will, down to the next generation. When I work with estate executors, because their longtime family home is now an estate, if their mom and dad or even an aunt or uncle, whoever it is, lived in one place for more than 40, 50 years, and that person is now gone, and it now falls to the next generation, the executor of that estate, to go through that house where it's the life accumulation of a family, and have to sell that when they've got emotional attachments to that house. They may not want the house. Nobody in the family may want to live there anymore, but there's a lot of emotional attachment to it. Everybody starts talking about all the holidays they spend, the happy occasions, the sad occasions, and it's a lot to ask of an executor who has already taken on a big task to also work through all the stuff that's in the house and deal with the physical structure at that point in time.
What brought you to this specialty?
It kind of evolved. I, as a real estate salesperson in my earliest career, I just happened to handle the sale of an estate property. Somebody had passed away. The executor of the estate, who, as is typical, had himself retired and moved out of the New York
Right.
area, right? With our relatives aging into their 80s and 90s, the executors of their estates are typically at least in their 60s, if not 70s also, and have retired and moved on with their lives. They no longer live where that family house is located. And that first experience was very typical. The executor of the estate was retired in Florida, and he had to sell his uncle's house in the Bronx.
Right.
And his uncle's house needed to be cleaned out. And there was a question of what repairs to make, because as people age, their houses tend to age as well or not well as they themselves have aged. And so it was just happenstance. And from that first experience, I realized there are some differences about how you have to sell an estate property versus a house that somebody's just moving out of to relocate. And that first experience kind of clued me into this different world. But I didn't immediately say, oh, I'm going to dedicate myself to this part of the market. But then there were other occasions where I got a client who was at an older age, and I started realizing there are some major differences in this part of the market. And as that gelled for me, I thought, okay, here's a market segment where I can not only make a difference in my life in terms of kind of specializing in something and learning everything I need to know about the nuances of selling a house or an apartment for someone who's been there a long time. But also, they make a difference in people's lives at a very vulnerable time.
Absolutely.
Because, if they went to the neighborhood real estate office, real estate people are trained salespeople. Go in there, get somebody to sign on the dotted line and move this sale along and move on to the next one.
Absolutely.
You can't do that when someone has lived someplace for 30, 40, 50 years. There's just too much that has to be done in advance of actually selling the residence.
Right. Well, and that's also often left to the family, and the family often needs help, or maybe there's not a family, as you just said. So,
right. And especially if the family has dispersed some elsewhere in the country, they're not physically here to do it. And they don't know the resources here, locally that they can call on. So having someone who says, don't worry about it, I'll take care of all of that, to the extent that the family wants you to. I mean, I've had clients who have been, who live themselves in California, New Mexico. I had a niece who never left her home in the Florida Keys to sell her uncle's apartment in the Bronx. I took care of that because I have the resources on the ground here to do what needs to be done. And if it is the homeowner themselves, they're moving on with their lives, and it's been a long time since they bought or sold a house. If they've lived in this house for 45 years, things have changed in real estate.
Absolutely.
Not just the prices, but the process has changed. Yeah. And they need someone who will take the reins and direct, not make decisions for them, but let them know what their options are.
Right.
They can make informed decisions without having to spend hours looking for and finding the resources they need.
Right. Now, you were based where?
Well, I work from my home base in New Rochelle, But I actually work in 11 counties throughout the metropolitan area. So four of the 5 boroughs. I'm sorry, Staten Island. I'm not going.
I say the same thing all the time. I work in the 4 boroughs.
The four contiguous boroughs, and then Nassau and Suffolk, and then up to certainly Westchester, Rockland. I'm a Rockland girl. I grew up in New City. Um, Putnam, Orange on the west side of the river, and then Putnam on the east side, Orange on the west side, but all the way up into Sullivan County.
Mhm.
If there's someone, so I like to sum it up by saying I work from Monticello to Montauk.
That's great. Now, and why would somebody, if you're in New Rochelle and somebody's in, Montauk, why would they not want to talk to a locally based real estate office and work with you?
Well, certainly the answer is that these two things are different, but there is a salient difference. Certainly a local, wherever it is, whatever town or borough or even New York City neighborhood somebody's living in, lots of local agents who do have lots of the same type of property. So whether it's a co-op in Riverdale or it's a single family house somewhere in Westchester, Rockland, any of the suburbs, those local agents sell a lot of the same type of property. And at any given time, they have multiple of those properties to sell, and they're going to do it. The difference is that they are responsible. They have the same responsibility to all of those sellers to sell each of those properties. And it doesn't matter which order they sell them in. So they're going to sell them all over some period of time. Doesn't matter what order that happens in, but yours might not be the next one that they find a buyer for. When I come to that property in a particular neighborhood or town, that one property is my entire focus. That's the only one I have to sell there. And so that seller gets all of my attention in that municipality, if you will. The local agent and I are both using exactly the same tools to disseminate the listing, to create the listing on the multiple listing service, to market that listing out into the universe, on all of the websites that any real estate shows up on. It's all happening the same way. It's just a matter of focus and volume. They're selling a whole bunch of houses in that neighborhood. I'm selling just yours. And neither of us, the local agent or I, have to convince a potential buyer to come to that neighborhood in the age we live in.
Exactly.
They know where they want to live.
Absolutely. They know it's available.
They know it's available. They know where they want to find something available. They know everything about the demographics, the school district.
Yeah, I have a friend who's looking to he's moving to Long Island, and we had this conversation. He said I was able to find what was out there online.
Right.
Everything is available, and that's the world we live in now.
And it is, as a buyer, I think. As a buyer, however, while you can gather information, the internet doesn't give you knowledge.
Right.
And there's a big difference between information and knowledge. So when a buyer is able to do all that research they need to determine where they want to live and what is available, then it's about having someone bring the knowledge of that purchase to your eventual transaction.
Yeah.
There's a lot of easy information available, but then how do you start digging into that? For instance, yes, you might like the town that something's in, and find the houses available. Are you able to tell if those individual properties are in a flood zone?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know to look for that? Do you know that how to check and make sure that what is being promoted as a 2-family house isn't actually a 1-family house with an illegal apartment basement. Those kinds of things, and that's the knowledge that whether it's a local real estate agent or somebody like me who travels around the area, that's knowledge that most home buyers don't have access to.
And again, what differentiates you is your ability to work well with seniors and homes, that are being sold that have a long history, decades old history. And that really makes a big difference. So the buyers will find you, but then how you handle them and how, your expertise in helping the family and or the individual is really invaluable.
Well, and that what I was just saying about knowledge kind of flips over to the sellers as well, because it may be one of my senior clients who did put a bathroom into the basement, or convert the garage
Absolutely.
into an extra room, right? A family room, but never bothered to get a new certificate of occupancy for the house. And when I come along and they say, "Whoa, this is what we've got," I say, "Well, yes and no." So sometimes I have to break the news to my clients that they've done something here that's going to be a problem. And now we have to deal with it. I have discovered violations that were 35 years old that, they just never cured with the city of New York.
Sure.
And, the city of New York has a lot of people to deal with, so the city hasn't caught up with them yet. But the fact of the matter is you can't sell the house with that violation open.
Well, the city's waiting for it to be sold to catch up.
Exactly. I've had clients who have thought their house was a 2-family house, and I come to tell them, well, you're being taxed as a 3-family house, actually. And in the city of New York, because the property taxes are so relatively low compared to the suburbs, don't rock that boat. You're not paying an exorbitant amount of money, but you think you've got a 3-family house. I'm sorry to say, your certificate of occupancy is for a 2-family house.
Right.
And I've had 2 cases where the city of New York is misidentifying the address of one of my clients' properties. And in one case, the consequences of that were that the city's Department of Finance thinks that the $206,000 it is owed in back taxes is coming from my client, not from the next door neighbor, because the city had shifted the address numbers by 1 lot. And that error had sat on the books for decades.
Wow.
We had to straighten it out before we could sell the house, obviously.
Your experience is invaluable.
So,
let me ask you, how do you handle spouses of families who may not agree about selling a long-term home?
well, not an uncommon occurrence. People are ready to make a change in their lives at different times, and that's just as true for spouses or perhaps widowers who, their adult children feel, mom and dad, whoever's the surviving spouse, shouldn't be living alone anymore. So the children often think that the parent should move before the parent is ready. But certainly spouses, I've had plenty of couples who one is ready to go and the other one is not.
Yeah.
Usually those disagreements are based on emotional connections. They're usually the emotions take over rather than the practical considerations. So what I try to do when I enter one of those discussions is bring objectivity to it. And I, after numerous experiences of trying to sort through the pros and cons, in verbal discussions, just sitting down and calmly discussing the pros and cons. I actually have developed a survey that I call "Should I Stay or Should I Go," which is people of our generation and earlier, we immediately start hearing the song. But it's just a list of questions that takes about 10 minutes to go through, and it is meant to be a barometer of the practical pros and cons, the size of the house, the condition of the house, the needs of the homeowners, people who are living there. How easy is it for them to live in that space, which may be different now than it was when they first purchased the property. Social connections, are their families still around? Is their social network still in that area, or has that dispersed outside of the area? Transportation, how do they get where they're going? Are they still driving? Are they relying on other people to get them where they need to go? Is there mass transit they can use? And we just go through all of these very practical, objective considerations and add up their totals for, is this an easy thing to maneuver? Is this a difficult thing for me to maneuver here? Ranging ranging from this is good, this is not so good, yeah, that's not working for me anymore.
Right.
We add up the totals, and depending on where on that scale they land, we can have an objective discussion about, is it time can you stay or can you go?
Right. What's great about it, it puts a numerical value on what's often a emotional issue.
And sometimes that's all it's really needed, is to kind of like, oh, wow, I hadn't really looked at that. I hadn't really thought about that. And so it's kind of a grounding exercise. And that, it doesn't mean, if indeed a score says, it's time to go.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean immediate upheaval necessarily. It means it's time to make a plan.
Right.
And it may be more urgent than in other situations, but that just means you make a plan and you move forward as efficiently and quickly as possible. It doesn't mean you're out of here tomorrow and your whole life.
Well, it's just another piece of valuable information.
Yeah, and in truth, I would say that typically working with a senior homeowner, or even an executor of an estate, the process between hello, how do you do? Oh, nice to see your house, and selling your house is at least a year. It can be shorter, certainly, but kind of melding the emotional with the practical, it's typically a year. And I would say that my longest gestation period, if you will, from how do you do to we're sold, has been 3 years. I'm about to close one that has been November will be a solid 3 years.
Yeah, no, that's not unusual, and certainly in the world of estate sales.
Estate sales, certainly, because the legal procedure is in the before times, if you will, it was a slow process. The pandemic just backed up the court so miserably that it's taking months and months and months to get things, to get legal processes and paperwork done that would take weeks. So instead of weeks, it's taking months. I've got one client who's sitting on an estate property for a year now, waiting for the court to issue letters testamentary so that the apartment can be sold.
Yeah, no, it's very difficult.
Yeah. But, again, it's a matter of timing. Salespeople want to move things ahead.
Yeah, of course.
Real estate specialists know patience is a virtue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the key. In our world, while we don't work exclusively with seniors, 85% are. And And that's one of our hallmarks, is that we have patience and we know who we're dealing with. And as you said, it's very rewarding, and it's really, it's dealing with these difficult emotions and making progress is a great feeling.
Yeah, and taking as much of the anxiety out of that as possible, because you and I do these things all the time. We know the realities are that things happen slowly and things evolve, and sometimes you have to find a workaround for something. But the anxiety comes from not knowing what to do about that,
Right.
or that something's taking so long. If you or I can tell our clients, look, don't worry about it, this is perfectly normal. It's frustrating, but it's normal. So there's no need for undue anxiety about this. That's a very reassuring,
Absolutely.
to be able to give to our clients. I do that virtually every day, and yesterday and today are no exceptions.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, Allison, this was really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this.
Right. And I neglected to say the name of your business is Key Real Estate Services. That information is going to be on the podcast as well as on the video. So people have that. And what's the best way? What way do you like it when people reach out to you?
Email or text are fine. And I'm always happy to get a phone call from someone that says, hi, I either saw you on, or so-and-so said I should call you. And that will start a conversation. If I typically don't answer the phone if I can't talk to someone when they call.
Right.
I'll call them back. But if someone calls with that kind of intro, I'm like, well, great, let's talk. Let me hear what's on your mind.
That's how it starts. Okay, Allison. Well, thank you very much. And everybody, I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you at the next podcast. Take care.